interesting views that are maybe different from what people have heard or what we do here, in fact. And my goal is to stimulate and emphasize game design as opposed to what maybe we have really been doing, which is exploiting our technical excellence. I think people know us as a group who could come and do anything, great graphics, great sounds. We can do anything on the screen, and that's the way people have viewed us. And I want to now emphasize more that we are game designers as well, that we know what we're doing to make a game fun, which is what is really important. It doesn't matter how good it looks or how good it sounds. If it's not fun, people aren't going to do it. And the other thing is that, you know, as everyone knows, our clients have their own views on game design, and I would like to be even stronger at arguments in our favor when we have our own design issues. And the important thing to remember is no matter what the client thinks he wants and how tight the deadlines are, the important thing is to make it fun, no matter what it takes to do that. We can't get tired of trying to do that. So open your minds up to becoming game designers as well as good technical programmers and hardware people, and whatever else you are, here, artists and sound people. Is that it? I guess that's all I have to say. Now we have 2 days to learn everything that Chris Crawford knows about game design. Thank you.
Well, I have handouts.
Official.
Because I don't want anybody taking notes. Okay, let me start off by warning you that I do not have a tightly defined structure. This outline may scare you and say, my God, he's going to start talking for 3 hours and he's not going to stop until he wakes up and says, oh my God, it's time to go. I've come here with I've spent a lot of time preparing these lectures, but you cannot memorize 12 hours of lecture. It's not like my standard 50-minute speech where I have memorized it precisely. I know exactly what I'm going to say. Rather, I've come here with a big bag of tricks, a lot of ideas that I want to talk about at some point, and a rough structure for them. But things are going to be kind of loose here. So, whatever. Let me talk about my goals, what I am trying to accomplish here. How many of you know the difference between education and training? Let me talk about that, because this is a fundamental thing. Training is something where, what I'm afraid of is that you're expecting me to train you, and I'm not. I'm going to try to educate you. If I were to train you, then basically you'd sit here and you'd scribble down a few notes. A, B, C, D. Okay, these are the 4 steps to good game design. And you take your little scrap of paper, go back to your desk, and say, all right, I'm going to design a game now. A, B, C, D. Okay, do that. Design a game. That's all there is to it, right? Training equips you with a skill. Training just sort of presents you with a fairly straightforward skill, and then you use it. In order to train somebody, you tell them how to do it, you show them how to do it, you let them do it, you let them make mistakes, you correct their mistakes, and then once you're satisfied they can do it, you send them on your way. Education is completely different. The point of education is to change the way people think. It is to mess with their minds. Education doesn't equip you with any useful skills at all. It teaches you how to think. Education then focuses more on your worldview. It's the gestalt you have, or your intellectual universe. And the idea here is that I'm going to be trying to change your intellectual universe. Right now, part of the problem here is that right now you are animals in a jungle called Incredible Technologies, and you are, this is very much survival of the fittest. and you have learned to adapt yourselves to the environment, and you have mastered the environment, you have learned the skills, you have adapted yourselves to the environment, and you now have this set of skills, set of talents, and more important, set of ways of thinking that are optimally suited for this environment. So you might imagine yourself as a sleek allosaurus, suggested thing there, or maybe big mean triceratops or whatever. You are ideally suited for this environment, and for that you deserve to be proud of yourself. There's a problem though. Way out in the distance, this great god called Dip is changing the environment on you, and all those beautiful talents that worked yesterday won't work tomorrow. Incredible Technologies is evolving. It's changing into a, Incredible Technologies tomorrow is not going to be the same company as yesterday. And if you are yesterday's dinosaur in tomorrow's company, you are not well adapted. And the survival of the fittest starts working against you. And so what we're talking about here is a change in outlook, a change in behavior. How's that change going to happen? Well, I'm not going to do it. In 2 days, I'm not going to transform you from an allosaurus into a leopard, or whatever you need, whatever type of animal you need to do. That change you're going to make. This is a fundamental difference. One of the other things we have to look for is, or be wary of, is the danger that you will view this as sort of like a college course. Because, gee, the last time you sat in on lectures a lot was back in college. And so this is going to be like that, right? Wrong. There are big, big differences. Back in college, you were 18, 19 years old, you were naive, you were impressionable, you were easy to fool. That college professor gets up there, and he's a big PhD, big smart guy, and he talks, and your eyes go big, and you say, wow, gee. And you take notes and copy down everything he says, and it just pours into your brain. And you accept everything he says, because he's the big know-it-all. Well, that won't work, because you've changed. You are not naive. You are adults. You have ideas of your own, a lot of opinions of your own. You have games that you have done. You are not the ignorant schmuck, and I am not the professor. The fundamental difference here is that where the professor just sort of grabs your mind and it's like clay in his hands and just and changes you around, you've got more intellectual hardening of the arteries. You are more set in your ways. You are more knowledgeable. So the process of change is going to be more difficult. You will be more skeptical. There's an additional problem, that this is not freshman physics. I mean, if I were teaching freshman physics, it'd be simple. I've taught that many times. I just get up in front and start going through Newton's laws, bang, bang, bang. That's simple. But what I'm here to talk about is state-of-the-art stuff. I don't know it that well. So I can't just stand up here and, as I mentioned the simile earlier, where I dress myself in robes and a white beard and walk in carrying these 2 stone tablets and say, here's how to do game design. Clonk. We are talking about a lot of fuzzy stuff here. So this is much more of a, imagine this to be like a research seminar rather than a college course. You are all much more intellectually mature, and the material is much more advanced. There's one other thing though. Because you are much more intellectually mature, much more knowledgeable, there is a responsibility inherent on you, and that's that you have to chew over the ideas a lot harder. That is, you're not a tabula rasa. I'm not just going to dump information on you and you're just going to absorb it. You have a problem that you have to fit it into all of your pre-existing notions. I'm not going to say you have to destroy your pre-existing notions. I am going to say you're going to have to somehow modify them. One of my goals here is to rattle your cages, to try to change the way you think about the world. I'm going to deliberately say a lot of outrageous things. I fully expect you to reject many of the things I say. There are a variety of responses you can have to the various ideas I'll be presenting in the next 2 days. You might, to some of them, you'll say, "Oh, wow, that's really neat, of course." But I knew that always. If so, I'm wasting your time. You might say, "Oh, wow, that's really neat, and I never thought of that." Well, good. If that happens, great. That's easy. You might say, "That's bullshit," and just patently reject what I have to say. I hope you don't do that immediately. What I'm really looking for, the really good ones, where we're really successful, come when you say, "That's bullshit," and then you think about it. And after a week or a month, you come back and you say, "Well, he was still basically wrong, but you know, there was an interesting idea in there." In other words, what I'm going for is for you to change enough that you'll get some useful new ideas out of this. But I'm not at all naive enough to expect you to simply buy the Crawford line lock, stock, and barrel. That's not going to happen. Each of you is going to react to this in different ways. I fully expect each of you will walk away from this with something different. I am hoping, though, that I will change each of you. I hope in some pretty fundamental ways. So, that's what I'm going to be trying to accomplish. Let me just talk about the mechanics here. We're going to be 4 lectures, each 4 hours in duration. I intend to talk about 3 hours out of those 4. I don't intend to run this as a Socratic dialogue because I think Elaine wasn't paying me to come here and act as Rogerian therapist. Take that idea and run with it. How do you feel about the way your mother talks about your games? That's probably not worth the money she's putting out. So I do intend to do most of the talking, but if you're going to work this into your style of thinking, there is going to have to be some dialogue here. I'm going to suggest the following format for those dialogues. Three channels here for dialogue. 1, instant interrupt when it is clear that I have stated something that needs clarification and I am moving on to a new idea. If I've developed an idea and it is clear to you that I haven't stated it clearly enough, interrupt me instantly and get me to clarify it right then and there. Second channel is challenge. I've said something, you understand, you think it's bullshit. Interrupt me after I've had a chance to get to the end of the idea. Let me finish the thought. But, after you've seen the whole idea and you know it's wrong, interrupt me then. I will try to deal with your challenge, depending on my gut level feeling. I'll give it a lot of time or a little time, and then I will continue going. I have a path I want to follow. I want to make sure I walk down this road fully. I'm only shooting for about 3 hours of talking, so there is time budgeted for interrupts to argue about ideas. Then finally, at the end of each session, I want to reserve 15 minutes to half an hour. It just depends on how well things go, just for sort of open discussion. All right, there it is. What do you think? If you have a low-level objection or idea or whatever, defer that to the end. So, another thing I will point out, we're going to be here for 4 hours per session. If you try to stay in those seats for 4 hours, your butts are going to start hurting. I know that when I'm in a long meeting, I need to get up and move around. I strongly urge you to meander freely. I will not be distracted if you get up and just walk around, leave, come back in, whatever, just so long as I can keep talking. That's good enough, because we're in this for the long haul, and your attention will weaken if if you just sit there for 4 hours. So, plunge into it here. I want to talk this morning about games and what they are and what they're like. And the very first thing I want to talk about, well, actually, maybe I should just stop. Are there any questions on the initial mechanics, or give you a chance to develop any of that?
Come on over to the front, Kyle. Come to the head of the class. Right down front.
Okay, well, let me talk about games here. You know, one of the most elementary things you have to do when you tackle any subject is ask the real dumb question, what are we talking about? What is a game? And a lot of people don't take the time to ask that question. And in fact, that is a question that you can spend years talking about. Game is a bad word because it is a very abused word. People use the term game to refer to all sorts of things, and so it is a fuzzy, terribly fuzzy term, and that fuzziness of the term leads to fuzziness of design. You cannot do good design work if you don't have a clear notion of just what a game is. There are an awful lot of things out there that aren't games, in my opinion, that are labeled as games. We use that word, hey, are you playing games with me or something? Wait a minute, that's a strange meaning of the word, but everybody knows what we mean. Game, well, that's meat. You go out and shoot a deer, that's game. Games as social interaction. Games as any form of recreation. It's just really sloppy terms. So let me try. Now, I'm not going to try to tell you what the word really means. A word is, a dictionary is merely a descriptive document. You cannot be prescriptive about a word. But for design purposes, I think it is important that a designer have a very clear notion of what he means by a word. So I would like to take this morning to talk about all the ramifications of that word and precisely what it means, and present to you a very narrow definition of the word game, a very precise definition that I think is much more useful than the fuzzy, sloppy word most people use. Now, there are 4 things that I associate with all games. First, I'm not going to give you a definition, because I don't think it can be done. But I am going to be able to give you 4 primary characteristics that I associate with games that are that will help you in the design process. First characterization, representation. A game represents something. Now, by that I mean that it is an image of something. It mimics something from the real world. But the manner in which it mimics it is fairly complicated. There are 4 aspects to representation. It is closed representation, a formal representation, a subjective representation, and it is a subset of reality. Let me go over those. First, closed and formal. A game has to be a closed subset of reality. It has to have boundaries around it. That's the only way people will have enough confidence in it to play it. This is one of the big mistakes a lot of designers make. They what I call humongous heap game design. They say, we're going to make a game here. You see this in Dungeons and Dragons a lot. And we're going to keep adding features. Or we're going to, hey, wow, I'm going to have purple dinosaurs. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to have pink and purple dinosaurs with blue polka dots. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to have dinosaurs that can talk in the dark. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to have dinosaurs that do this and that. We're going to have more levels in my dungeon than your dungeon. And, oh, yeah, well, my dungeon goes up in the sky and has upper levels as well as lower levels. Oh, yeah, well, my dungeon has even more monsters. And they just keep adding more and more and more. And it gets bigger and bigger. And the idea a lot of people go for is the notion is somehow a good game, it gets closer and closer to reality. It gets bigger and bigger. And that is flat wrong. Because, you see, for a person to play a game, a person is extending himself when he goes into a game. He's putting himself into an environment, and he needs to feel that there are nice, safe boundaries. He needs to feel, you know how cheated you feel? Imagine we were playing a game, you know, a card game, hearts, whatever. I recall a MASH episode or something like this where you're playing a game and we've got our rules and you say, ah, and you put down your cards and you say, I win. And just then I say, oh, I didn't tell you, but on the first and third Thursdays of every month, red cards are allowed to be taken by the dealer. So I'm sorry, I take your card, you don't win. Try again. How would you feel if I pulled that on? You'd feel mad, upset. That's cheating. That's not fair. The idea is you have this sense that there's closure to the game. There are rules, and so long as I'm within these walls, I can move freely. I can do anything I want, and I know where the walls are, and there's no danger. And then if all of a sudden you're maneuvering around in the walls and your hand goes through a wall, all of a sudden your confidence in the game is shattered. A game needs a clear sense of boundaries around it. This is a point, a very deep psychological point that technical people have difficulty with, because when you're designing, when you're working with equipment, you're always trying to push out against barriers. Your whole view as an engineer is that technology is limited and I can't do as much as I want. I want to push these walls back. I want to make the room bigger. I want to break barriers. I want to do new things. So you have this whole mindset of expanding the universe. And that's fundamentally what every engineer does. And that's great. That's good. The only problem is that a game player needs the confidence of knowing where the walls are, knowing that he won't fall off the edge of the world or something like that, knowing that I've got my nice neat little universe, and I know where the universe is, and I know what the rules are, and there are not going to be any surprises. These two ideas are not contradictory, they're not antithetical, but because you can expand the technology and still say, here are the walls, don't run into them. There's nothing, I mean, walls will exist no matter what. You just want to make sure they are clear to the player. So you've got to have closure in a game. You don't want to create soft, fuzzy walls for the player. You don't want to try to convince him that this is reality and he can do anything he wants. He can't. You know he can't. There are always going to be limitations. So it's better to put the walls up with big signs to say, here is the wall. Give him closure. The player needs that. It's one of the things that encourages the sense of play. I'll give you another example of this. One of the worst buttons on any computer keyboard says break. Now, you and I know what that means. The average beginning person does not. I mean, they look at that and say, oh my God, what if I press that button? I'm gonna break it. And in fact, a lot of people have, if you look at a naive user, watch that user carefully, there's tremendous fear. They're looking at that keyboard saying, what if I press the wrong button? They have this sense that this computer is hooked up to the trigger mechanism on H-bombs all over the world. And if they just happen to press the wrong combination of keys, they're going to start World War III. And so they just back up. Okay, what can I say safely here? Tell me something safe that I can say. I'll do that, no problem, so long as I know it's safe. But by God, I'm not going to try anything risky here, because who knows, I could start World War III. What closure does is, closure says, no, look, there are no wires going out to H-bombs. There's no way that you can get into danger here. No way you can get outside of safe territory. Once the player knows that, once he knows he's safe, then the player can loosen his tie and say, well, let's play. But the only way he's going to have that confidence, the only way he's going to be willing to play, is if he knows that there's closure, that there's no dangerous territory out there. So closure is essential in any game. Formal. A game must be a formal system. That is, it's got to have clear rules. Again, this runs counter to some people's view that you want to have so much messy stuff in there that it feels real. It feels just as messy as reality. Well, suppose you succeeded in that. Well, this is one of the great tests of technology. You should always ask when you're building new technology, what happens if we succeed beyond our wildest dreams? What happens if you made a game that would feel just like reality? Well, then nobody would play it. Because who plays with reality? Reality is dirty and messy and has nasty consequences. You know, you go out and you walk across the hall, walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm Curly." Bonk. They're going to bonk you right back. You know, oh, that's not what happens in the computer game. So you don't want reality. You want the safety of knowing that you can play, that you can do dumb, risky things, and it'll just produce laughs. So, and the only way to do that, this is associated with being closed, is to have formal statements of where the limits are. Yes, you can start World War III in the computer, but no, it won't start a real World War III. So you need a formal statement of where the game ends. Normally, we call this formal statement the rules of the game. Good rules are essential. And in computer games, the rules are never really stated very well. This is one of the neat things about computer games. In board games, almost all games before computer games, the rules were managed by the players. And so the player had to study this rules book. Like war games, these rules books were huge documents, very difficult to understand. They read like a legal contract. With the computer just manages all the rules. The player doesn't even need to study the rules. The player still has to know what the rules are. Players get real upset when the rules screw up on them, or when they perceive that in some way the rules don't make sense, or the rules are unfair. That's a real good way to turn off a player. Player needs confidence. He needs to know, these are the rules, this is fair, that isn't. I can do anything that's fair and nothing that's not fair. They need that simple-minded view of the universe. So you've got to have formality there. Third thing, the representation of the universe that a game presents is a subjective representation. That is, a game isn't a simulation. We're not here to give absolute reality. We're here giving a version of reality, our version of reality. This gets right down to the core of what art is. A painter doesn't slavishly copy every fine detail. A painter is not put out of business by a photographer. A photograph is not better than a painting of the same subject. A painting is presenting a subjective representation of the thing that the photograph captures. Two very different things, but you don't say, the photograph is better because it's more realistic. The painting can be better because it can focus your attention on subjective truths. A game does present a highly subjective view of reality. In fact, let me elaborate on this point a bit. In many ways, every game is about reality. In many ways, a game can be about aspects of reality, can clarify your image of reality. Let me give you the best example of this I can think of. Space Invaders. Space Invaders is about reality. It's not about little monsters. It's about the way the world is. I mean, here you are, down at the bottom of the heap. And there are all these bastards up there shitting all over you. And they just stand here going, ha ha ha, dropping things on you, going, ha ha ha. And they're dropping all this shit on you. And what can you do? You can't leave. You can't get up there with them. They're over you. All you can do is just kind of dodge out of the way, back and forth, and occasionally shoot back at the bastards. And that's all you can do. Now, that is a subjective representation of reality. But boy, that hit a chord with a lot of people. Which is one reason why that game was so immensely successful. Yeah, sure, it was a hot action game. Yeah, it was pulse pounding and so forth. But it also represented reality in a powerful way. A very subjective representation, a very distant representation. You might even say a very distant metaphor. But that was there. So and that exists in all games. So this subjective representation is immensely important. Finally, it's a subset of reality, and that goes in with the fact of closure. Again, you can't fit all of reality inside a computer, so you have to pick a subset. The important thing, though, is that you don't just say, well, it's going to be a subset. Is it an artfully chosen subset? Is it a good subset? I mean, you can just sort of slice off a corner of reality and present it to the user, and if you randomly slice off a random corner, you'll get garbage. The real test of brilliant game design is boiling down something very, very complex and presenting a subset that captures the essence of it clearly and simply. One of the words I always use is focus. Does the game have focus? Does it really present what we're doing? I'll use one of my games as an example of that. Eastern Front 1941. There had been a number of computer war games before Eastern Front, and they were pretty much straight copies of board games. And they didn't work very well. They just weren't very good war games. And then I came out with Eastern Front, and this was an immensely successful game. We sold 60,000 units in one format, which was pretty astounding. Why was this game so successful? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but I think one of the important factors in the success of Eastern Front was the very, very clear focus of the game. In talking about military strategy, it boiled a lot of very complex military strategy down to a very clear, simple representation of reality. Everything revolves around movement. You take a military unit, you can move that unit north, south, east, or west. And so a move in one turn is 2 steps east, 1 step north, a step east, another step north. And along the way, he'll fight anybody he encounters. And so I was able to take military operations and all the complexity in it and boil that down to 2 steps east, 1 north, 1 east, 1 north. And so all of this complexity was reduced to a single expression. An expression that people could understand, that they could immediately grasp. And then they could say, all right, military operations, I'm going to punch through here, and I'm going to move around there, and I'm going to circle these guys. And then they were able to see military operations more clearly than they could see them before that game came out. So when you do a subset of reality, it has to be a good, clear, clean, focused subset. Okay, so a game represents reality. Next main characteristic of a game, and this is the most important characteristic of any game. A game has interaction. I feel that that right there is the very essence of what happens in a game. The player, first let me define that a little. Let me differentiate between interaction, participation, and observation. Observation is the lowest level. Observation is a very passive thing. You sit on your butt and you watch things. Participation is a little bit better. Things are still going to happen, but you get to sing along. So that's still not very much. Interaction is where you make it happen. So imagine 3 possibilities. Here's a concert, rock concert, guys up there. Observation is you're sitting in your chair listening to the music. Participation is you jump up out of your seat, you dance along with the music. Interaction is you climb up on the stage and you say, no, 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 I want the beat a little faster here. You with the drums, let's get some more volume there. And you start telling people how it happens. You start changing it. And the important thing here is interaction involves a loop. It always requires 2 sentient entities. That is, first sentient entity does something, takes some course of action. That course of action must be communicated to this guy, and the communication must be clear. This is a very important point. For example, it's hard to have interactions involving conspiracies, because if it's a conspiracy, it's secret. And if it's secret, well, then I may be doing something, but you don't know about it. So, not much basis for interaction. So I do something, I communicate that to you. Then you have to crunch it over. You have to think about it and come up with your reaction to it. You come up with your reaction. You communicate it to me. And then I have to crunch over your reaction. And this is important. There has to be a rough level of equality here. For example, you really don't get a good interaction between unequal people, boss and employee, president or dictator and peasant, whatever you want. Because if one person is in a position of superiority and can just say, go to hell, it's not much interaction. Where you get a good interaction is, say, husband and wife. Hey, we're equal partners here, so I say this, which comes over to you, you think about it, you say this, well, gee, I have to respond to that. I have to come back on your terms. I crunch it over a little, come back with something else. We're going round and round and round through this interaction loop. Interaction is immensely important because that's one thing that games have that nothing else has. They give us acknowledgement. They're the one thing in the world where people respond to us as we are. Normally, in times past, we've always played games with other people because people were the only things that could interact back with us. You can't really interact with a cookie. You eat the cookie. It doesn't get much chance to respond. It just gets eaten. But with computers, we can now replace the person with the machine, if we're good enough. That's the big problem. Can we program it to give a rich interaction? That is the central challenge. I'll be talking there. I'm having problems right now because there are a lot of things I want to say about interaction. I don't want to jump the gun on, so I'm just going to kind of rush past this. I'll be coming back to this point about interaction many times in the next few days. Let me just, at this point, make the main point. Interaction is the very essence of what a game is. Conflict. Conflict is essential in any game. Conflict is essential in any story. Conflict is what makes a story interesting. Conflict is what creates the interaction that you observe in a story. That is, here you are watching a movie, and, how many people saw broadcast news? Did everyone see that? No. Okay. Fatal Attraction. Everybody see Fatal Attraction? Star Wars? Okay. We had some conflict there. I mean, there was this guy dressed in white, young, innocent, nice. Okay. Then there was this other guy dressed in black, not young, not innocent. Okay. We got conflict here. Okay. We got them, whack, whack, whack with their lightsabers blast. That's conflict. And that's important because that's what causes all of the interesting interaction. Luke wandering around in deep angst. Is he my father? What is the meaning of the Force? And all of this stuff going on. The conflict is what made all of that interesting. Conflict is an essential component. Some of you, I believe, have some training in theater or in the fine arts here. And this is just one of the absolute rules. This is kindergarten 1A in theater and storytelling. You gotta have conflict. Well, the same thing happens in games. There are actually some interesting relationships between games and stories I'll get to in a few minutes. But games must have conflict in them. Conflict is what ensures the interaction. One of your fundamental problems is, what's to stop the player? Here's a player, walks up to your game, picks up the joystick or mouse or whatever, looks at the game. What's to stop him from saying, and just turning around and walking away? Why should he play? Or more important, why should he get involved in the game? What's going to suck him in? Well, conflict is the only thing that's really going to guarantee interaction. You've got to have some conflict in there. There have been many attempts at producing cooperative games. Over the years, I've seen quite a few of these, especially in the aftermath of the 60s, all through the early 70s. There were all of these nice games where you didn't shoot anybody or do bad, nasty things. I remember one where there was this ecology game. The idea was, we're going to save the beavers from from the Army Corps of Engineers. See? Only we love the Army Corps too. So we're not going to have any conflict in the game. It was a terribly boring, crummy, stupid game. I managed to get through one playing of the game out of discipline. You know, it is good for me to study this game, so keep going, guys. Terrible game. People, yeah?
Sorry, are you talking about a board game?
Yeah, it was a board game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The chronology was a little fruity for...
Yeah,
I
obviously not a
did
computer
a
game.
storyboard
Yeah.
once where there were whales on one side, Russian trawler on the middle, and you were Greenpeace in the middle.
Okay.
Good swell.
Well, actually, there is some conflict in there. If you're willing to say Russian trawler are bad guys. See, it's just that if the conflict is weak, that is, if you're not allowed to nuke the Ruskies, you know, if all you can do is just sort of say, hey, I'm cool, man, I'm just going to stand between you and the whales, the conflict is weak then. You don't get a chance to really get in there and have an intense conflict. Now, that doesn't mean that conflict has to be violent. There's a lot of people think that, hey, we're going to have conflict? Okay, who do I shoot? Watch a movie like Broadcast News or...
Try something that's been on cable.
Well, here, I'll give you an example. Star Trek The Next Generation. I'm sure there are some of you who don't like it, but I'm immensely impressed by that. Do you realize that in that entire show, in all the episodes I've seen, the captain has yet to punch anybody's lights out? You realize that in old Star Trek, I mean, Captain Kirk was going through space, two-fisted, blam, blam, take that, you aliens, and then, green woman, seduce you. Do you realize this captain is yet to seduce anybody? We have not seen, I mean, the old Star Trek had some pretty simple conflicts, you know. Punch the bad guy, or basically there were three conflicts in old Star Trek. I'm digressing. Either punch the aliens' lights out, convince the computer that it doesn't, you know, ask it some self-referential questions. The computer goes, that does not compute, and smoke comes out of its ears and it dies. Or three, there are about at least a dozen Star Trek episodes that had that basic storyline. Or three, seduce the green girl. And they had a few variations on that. Instead of Captain Kirk, we'll have McCoy do it, or Spock do it, or whatever. Anyway, yes, you need conflict, but the conflict doesn't have to be violent. There are a lot, the best example I'll give here are a lot of very, very good movies where nobody ever gets killed, nobody ever gets their lights punched out, and yet there are intense conflicts going on. I'm not saying we have to go all the way down to My Dinner with Andre. Right now, good examples escape me. The best one I can think of is Broadcast News. We've got this intense love triangle going on, conflicts on the part of all three characters. Some pretty rough conflicts, a very involving movie. And there are lots of these things come out all the time. So you can have lots of conflict. The important thing is that it be conflict that people care about. Violence is the most intense form of conflict. And that's why it has been used so heavily in games. I mean, it's the easiest form of conflict. And it's real simple to represent. You know, you're dead or I'm dead. You know, what could be more simple than that? But that doesn't mean it's the only way to do conflict. You can have, the important problem here is if you want to have nonviolent forms of conflict, you have to somehow be able to represent them. And unfortunately, most of those nonviolent forms of conflict are much more subtle and therefore much more difficult to do. So we have to build conflict into our games. We're going to have to move away from violence. You can only push violence so far. It only works for a limited period of time. Eventually, you've got to address other forms of conflict, and that is difficult. That's one of the things that our art has to address. We have to learn that. Fourth feature, safety. This is extremely important. What you're going to do here is learn to play a game. And you're going to learn by playing. Let me digress here and talk a little bit about the educational aspects of games. People sometimes observe, with my games especially, wow, Balance of Power is so educational. Wow, I mean, I learned where Botswana is. And people frequently ask, do games have educational value, or what is the educational value, and so forth. All games are intrinsically educational. In fact, I argue that games are the original educational technology. That is, if you ever really want to understand games, you should go to the zoo sometime and go to lion cage or tiger cage, someplace where they have cubs, and or just watch kittens, and watch them playing with each other. And what do? Run, one of them is standing here, and another, sees his sibling and starts sneaking, creeps around behind the other one, gets behind a little bit of grass, and then gets real low, lays the ears down flat, and gets the haunches up and wiggles the haunches, and pounces on the other cat, and the other cat goes, ah, and they jump and they grab on each other, and they a little kicky kick, and a little bitey bite, and a little clawy claw, and they roll around. What are they doing here? Well, what they're doing is playing a game. Only this is an intensely educational game. There is interaction going on. What they're doing is a representation of reality to them. What they're representing is the kill. It has all these features: representation, interaction, conflict, and it has a fourth feature that's crucial: safety. Nobody's really going to get hurt playing this game. They keep their claws retracted. They don't bite with their full force. They instinctively know this is a game, don't use everything, but they do play it. The 2 points I want to make about this observation are, first, the intrinsic educational nature of this. Nature has been using games as a way to teach for millions of years. This is the most powerful educational technology. It's not games that are some newfangled experiment. School is the newfangled experiment. School is the aberration from reality that has not been tried, the frivolity. Games are the tried and true, the proven way to educate. Nature has been using it all of these years. It is an immensely powerful educational technology because you're right there, you're learning by doing. But it's crucial that it be safe. If you're going to play the game, you've got to know that you're not going to get hurt doing it. If those kittens had their claws extended, they'd hurt each other, they wouldn't do it again. So they just know one of the rules of the game is don't hurt your sibling. That way, we'll do it a lot of times. We'll get better so that we can learn the skills of the hunt and the skills of the kill. So that applies in our game playing too. Game playing has to be safe. You can't punish the player. I mean, we always make jokes about rigging up the wire, the electric wire to the thing, and it says, you lose, zap, or something like that. And it's a cute joke, but it is 180 degrees off the mark. Because if we really did punish the player, it wouldn't be a game. It's got to be safe. You've got to be able to go into a game and know, ha ha, I got my head chopped off, put in another quarter, ha ha ha. You've got to be able to know that it's absolutely safe to get in this game, that there's nothing you're going to lose. They're not going to format your hard disk. They're not going to send turn on the modem and send a message to the CIA telling them this guy's a turkey of a gameplay or anything like that. There's got to be an absolute sense of safety, and you have to support that. It's not merely a matter of the negative aspect of I'm not going to hurt you, but there's an emotional aspect to this. You need to encourage the fantasy of safety. So in many ways, you want to encourage. Three Stooges, actually, I can think is an excellent emphasis on this. The humorous aspect of bonk, bonk, bonk him on the head. See, he's fine, nothing happened, he's not hurt. What that translates to is safety. You can do outrageous, ridiculous things. Things that if you did them in the real world, you might hurt somebody. Only you didn't hurt him, he's got a hard head, or something like that. Safety is essential, and you need to nurture the sense of safety. So if you're dealing with deadly stuff or serious business, you somehow want to convey to the user, this is only a game. Now, depending on circumstances, you can violate that. I'll give you an excellent example of where I violated that. Balance of power. If you lose that game, that means you have started a nuclear war and blown up the world. Now, the right way to enforce safety in balance of power then, or to nurture the sense of safety, would be to have a cute little cartoon thing, mushroom cloud with parts of bodies flying through the air and say, "Oh no, look what you did!" And little bodies flying through the air say, "Oh dude, this is terrible!" Or what, yeah, that's it. "Oh no, Mr. Bob!" Something like that. I didn't do that. I went in exactly the opposite direction. I put up this black screen that in very stark font just says, "You have initiated a thermonuclear war, and no, there is no animated display of a mushroom cloud with parts of bodies flying through the air. We do not reward failure." It is a very stark, very striking message. That works in that game because the intent of the game is so very serious. And the player is expecting, he wants to get into the fantasy of, I'm the president, TV news, the fate of nations hangs in the balance. He really wants to move into that feeling. And to support the fantasy of reality, to bring him deeper into the game, I needed to compromise this safety principle. I got away with it, but that was a chance I was taking. In fact, there are some people who feel that balance of power has too somber a tone to it. It's too rough, too grinding on the player. It's just too harsh an experience for some people. So I made a judgment decision, and for some people I erred. So an important point here, safety is an important point in all games. You're not going to open up and say, "Let's play," unless you know you're safe. You wouldn't open up and play with strangers. You need a nice, soft, warm, fuzzy environment in order to get that sense of play out. Finally, a point on this safety issue and the educational aspect. Most people think of game playing as a childish activity, and this is one of the things we have to change. There is nothing intrinsically childish about game playing. Game playing is an educational activity, and most education is concentrated in our youth. And that's why we associate game playing with children. But our culture is changing, and one of the fundamental changes of the 20th century is that the educational process extends far into adulthood. That is, in 14th century France, it took you only a few years to learn how to handle the basic agricultural implements that 98% of the population used. In 20th century America, you must continue to educate yourselves throughout the bulk of your career. You will be learning new things for many more years. Everybody in this society faces this problem. We are all constantly in learning mode. Accordingly, educational technologies are entirely appropriate for adults, and since games are the most powerful educational technology, it's entirely appropriate people play games as adults. Actually, I shouldn't be lecturing you about this. I should be lecturing the public about this. But you're the people who are going to be implementing all of this. So I suppose one of the things I'm saying is, don't be ashamed about presenting a game for adults. Don't assume that because it's a game, you're necessarily talking to children. Obviously, you cannot just immediately start out doing complicated games for adults. But let me point out that such games have already been economically successful. I'll give you one number that will give you an idea. Balance of Power is clearly a game for adults. There's no way a kid is going to sit down and mess around with insurgency and Finlandization and problems with weapons, shipments, and aid to the Contras. That isn't kid stuff at all. So here's a game that is strictly for adults. My quarterly royalties payment for fourth quarter 1984 is in fourth quarter 1987 is in 6 figures. So this is serious business here. I mean, there is a marketplace here. So don't assume that adult games are some tiny niche that never works. So look at the sales numbers on Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's no kiddie toy game. That's strictly an adult product, and that thing has been on #1 on almost every chart for years now. So, anyway, let's see. Safety. Okay, so we got 4 primary characteristics of games: representation, interaction, conflict, and safety. Those things characterize a game. They give you an idea of what a game is like. It's something that represents the world. It gives you lots of interaction. There's conflict in it to force the interaction, and it's reasonably safe. That gives you an idea of what it is. Now let me talk about what it isn't. I'm going to try to get closer to what a game really is by differentiating it from other things that aren't games. So, let me go through some things that aren't games. What's the difference between a game and a simulation? There's a lot of confusion over this point, and in fact the confusion is well based. Because simulations, for example, balance of power, is it a game or is it a simulation? I maintain it is a game, not a simulation. And yet, it does simulate a lot of reality. Yes, there's a lot of overlap between games and simulations, but there are some fundamental differences, and you must have a clear notion of what those differences are. The fundamental difference is that is in intent. A simulation strives towards accuracy. A simulation is a heuristic tool, that is an educational tool, an experimental tool. Above all, a simulation can be used as an analytical tool. That is, for example, there are some geopolitical simulations available right now being done. This is funny. About a year ago, ESL, a big defense contractor in Silicon Valley, asked me in to consult with them on a geopolitical simulation they were preparing for use in the Pentagon. You know, they called me up and said, "We're really impressed by balance of power, and we were wondering if you could just come in and give us some pointers, because we're working on this big thing that the Department of Defense will be using." So they called me in, and Jesus, there's this giant simulation they're preparing. They're doing the whole thing in some sort of propositional language, so that the individual statements were directly accessible to the players. See, their intention, and it's done on this huge symbolic system with, I think they had 20 megs of RAM on it, 200 meg hard disk, and a complete database on every event that had happened in every nation in the world for the last 20 years. All of these expert system rules about when coups take place and how diplomats respond to events and so forth. Monster system. And the neat thing was you could sort of go forward in time. And this thing was so thorough, it went a week at a time, and it crunched. You'd say, all right, let's go to the second week in November 1989. And it would go off for a minute. And there was a little window that would pop up that would say, all right, this is what we're doing now. Calculating this and so forth. And it'd take about 2 minutes, and you'd say, okay, we just calculated 1 week of time. The neat thing was you could then call up events and say, well, what happened? And you'd say, well, we had some unrest in Thailand. And then you could go in and say, why did we have unrest in Thailand? You could just break right into the program right there and see everything that happened. And so if, for example, the Russians shoot down a Korean airliner, you can go in and ask, why did they do that? What were the decisions? And if you want to, you can say, wait a minute, they learned their lessons from KAL 007. Therefore, I'm going to put in something saying, if this is a Korean airliner and these are Russians, no, this won't happen. So you can break into the thought process of the program and modify it as you're working on it. Very impressive piece of work. It took me about 2 hours to convince these guys that they didn't want my help, because I'm a game designer, not a simulation designer. And they couldn't understand the difference, because they said, well, yeah, maybe just a game, but it's still a damn good simulation. I'm saying you are thinking about it all wrong, because a game and a simulation have completely different intents. A simulation is something that you want to break into. You want to know why it fails. In the case of a geopolitical simulation, you want to know why. You want to be able to predict, riots in Israel. How will Jordan react? And you want to ask questions about it and play with it and change the way it operates. You want to study a simulation. A simulation is an intellectual tool for analyzing a system. It is imperative that a simulation be realistic and accurate. I'll give you a very good example. Let's look at the difference between flight simulators as games and flight simulators, serious flight simulators. Let's say, here's a guy at home sitting around a Microsoft Flight Simulator, puttering around. Let's fly around San Francisco. Oh, wow, we'll fly under the Golden Gate Bridge. Isn't this fun? Now, here's another guy training to pilot 747s on one of these professional simulators. What's the difference between what these two people are doing? There is a gigantic difference. This guy over here on the 747 simulator, he's sitting here and they throw a problem at him. Say, whoops, sudden downdraft. You're coming in for a landing, you're 50 feet above the ground, all of a sudden a downdraft. What are you going to do? Well, at this point, he's going to learn the hard way. You've got to shove that throttle forward, you've got to pull the nose up, and this is how far forward you want to shove the throttle, because if you push it forward too much, you get too much power, maybe you could overdo things. You've got to be prepared for the wings to, wings to drop one way or the other, depending on where the main thrust of the downdraft is. That pilot wants to know exactly how the plane will respond to the situation. He's got to know that exactly because a year from now, he's going to be out there in the real world. That downdraft's going to hit him, and he has to know what that 747 will do. So accuracy is crucial in a simulation. In a game, completely different story. We don't care about the details of exactly how the plane is going to respond. We just want to get the feeling right. We want to give you the feeling that, hey, you bank the plane and it turns. Isn't that nice? You push the nose down, it goes down. You pull the nose up, it goes up. You go faster, you get more lift, the plane goes up. We want to get the basic principles down. We want the game to be believable to you. We want it to convey the feeling of flying. We don't care if the details are raw. I mean, this plane, you bank at 30 degrees at this altitude and this temperature and pressure, and the nose will rotate by so many degrees per second. Okay, do we need that in a flight simulator? No. Or in a game? No. Do we need it on the 747 simulator? Damn right. People's lives depend on the simulator being accurate. Nobody's lives depend on the game being accurate.
Is the Microsoft simulator, in your opinion, a game?
No, actually not, because there's no real interaction. There's a vague interaction between you and the aerodynamic environment, but the aerodynamic environment doesn't shoot back. For real interaction, you've got to have a willful personality. I mean, if the air were saying, hey, let's fool him now, I'm going to do this, then it'd be a game. You know, here's a crucial test I didn't mention earlier, anticipation. That is, a real test of interaction is, can I step back and anticipate your behavior or my opponent's behavior and say, what will he do if I do this? And try to fool you. Try to say, well, you know, if I do this, he'll think I'm doing that. And then I can do this instead, I'll get him. If you can go through that type of thought process, then you've got good interaction. The only thing is you can't fool air. It's dumb. So, you know, there really isn't that basic interaction going on. Flight Simulator is actually a puzzle. So it's a dynamic puzzle. And a very complex puzzle, but it's still a puzzle, not a game. In fact, by my definitions, about 99% of the stuff out on the market is puzzles. So, not games. So you can see, maybe my definition stinks, but I think my definition represents idealism more than reality.
Well, if I can just interject, I think what you mean instead of puzzle is play, because really game, the standard definition for game is play with rules. So there's no reason to denigrate. You feel as though you're denigrating puzzles by just calling them puzzles, not games. I mean,
Yeah.
they're just unruled play.
Yes, yes. You can
Never
have,
define play,
you
but
can
that's a whole
play
thing.
in a lot of situations without game.
Right.
Game and play don't have to go together to each other exclusively. There are a lot of situations where there's play without games. So let's see. So the fundamental difference between a simulation and a game is in the intent of the designer. This is a matter of focus. Don't think of a simulation as a better version of a game. A simulation is a more realistic version of a game. A good game designer is going to deliberately cover up details that are distracting. I want to give you the feeling of flying. You're not going to be a pilot. You don't need to know the details. You're in here to get a feel for it. So I'm going to give you that feeling really well. So it's crucial in a flight simulator that the visual display, as a game, as an entertainment product, that the visual display feel right, that the frame rate be high. That's crucial. Another crucial thing, which we've yet to do, is that you get the texture of the ground right. We've never been able to do that. We always do it with wireframe stuff, and that's not good enough. But we're working on it. Obviously, the next step is to get textured grounds. The important thing is to get the feel right, and that's boy, a lot of people miss this point because they keep on going after realism. I mentioned earlier the difference between a painting and a photograph. Let me go back to that one. A painting can show you something more clearly than a photograph can. Imagine a really good portraitist imagine you want a picture of your father. You're going to give your father a birthday present. Now, and you want a nice picture of it. You could just take a photograph of it and have it, blown up nicely and then put in a nice frame and so forth. Or you could go to a painter and say to that painter, I want you to go talk to my father, get to know him, and I want you to go back and paint a portrait that really shows what my father is like, that really captures his character, his integrity, his fatherliness, everything that's good about him. And that painter will go back and make a portrait that's a lot different than the photograph. I mean, the portrait of your father that comes out of that would, maybe stern, or maybe he looks really fatherly, but somehow that painter is going to emphasize, if he's really good, your father's character is going to show up on his face. That's something no photograph can do. That's better than a photograph. Yes, the photographic detail isn't there. You don't get every little hair and every little wrinkle on his face there. But the painter can show some things more clearly than the photographer can. And that's the difference between a good game design and a good simulation. A good game design can show aspects of reality more clearly than a simulation can, because you focus in on those and you throw out all the little details that get in the way. This is very close to the fundamentals of what an artist does. An artist not only captures reality, he throws away the distracting parts of reality. And this is the difference between a game and a simulation. A simulation tries to get it all. A game tries to get what needs to be said clearly. It focuses in on a subset of reality and does it clearly. Okay, so that's the difference between a game and a simulation. Games versus stories. Boy, we have a lot of problems on this one too. Interactive fiction, interactive movies. A lot of people are talking about this stuff, trying to see, what's the connection? The cinemaware and let's do a movie and make it into a game. Fundamental problems here. No. Let's see. Let me talk
really
about.
wish John Cutter was here today.
Like conference call. Bring in the cross.
Trying to produce what they thought was an interactive
Tape his eyeballs open.
At least there's no animosity. At least there's no animosity towards John.
There are some fundamental differences between what a game is and what a story is. A story, and I think we can present it in terms, I think that the illuminating word that really brings this out is the word storyline. A story has a storyline. It starts off, once upon a time, there were 3 stooges, and then they went to the supermarket, and then they got into a food fight, and then the manager yelled at them, and then the cops came, whatever. And then they all lived happily ever after. That is, it's a sequence of events. and it's a linear sequence. That's the fundamental thing about a story. Stories always follow a line. I imagine a story as circle, arrow, event, arrow, event, cause, effect, cause, effect. He did this, and therefore he did that, and therefore that guy happened, therefore this happened, therefore that happened. And that's why Hamlet ended up dying. There is always cause and effect in a story. The events are connected in a temporal relationship that suggests cause and effect. Well, I'm going to get into that point. There's so many problems. There's so many things I want to say. Some of this I want to put off for later. In fact, what am I going to be talking about? Yeah, I'll be talking about that this afternoon. A game doesn't use a storyline. It uses a story net. That is, the best way to explain it is, here you are watching a movie. A movie is just a story on video. You're watching a movie, and the movie starts off, dark and stormy night, car driving down the driveway, beautiful, innocent girl at the steering wheel. All of a sudden, the car goes, conk, 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 conk. She pulls the car over, gets out of the car. Oh, dear, what do I do now? Looks up, crash, bolt of lightning comes down, dark, forbidding house standing there. She looks up at the house and says, I'll just go in and use the telephone. At this point, everybody in the audience says, don't go in the house! And what does she do? She goes in the house. She walks up to the door, and she goes, and there's this long pause, and then the door all by itself goes, creak, and opens, and cobwebs are hanging down. And she looks in and says, is anybody home? And nothing happens. And she says, well, I suppose I'll just go in. And everybody says, no, don't go in! And, basically the whole story. How many times do you watch a story where characters do things and you're saying, no, no? Well, see, that's the problem. In a story, it's going to walk down that path. And whatever you think doesn't matter. It's going A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And probably in the end she'll come out of it alive. I don't know. If it's a teeny slasher movie, she won't. But, you don't get any say in what happens. It's going to follow the storyline. You're being led down the primrose path. That's just the way it is, friend. This is a story. That's what's neat about a game. In a game, you get to be, the pretty girl driving down, and the car conks out, and you look up, and there's that house. You say, I'm not going in that place. No, I'm going to walk down this road just soaking wet. That's a lot better. You had that choice. Maybe it won't be a very interesting game, but you had the choice. The interesting thing here then is, rather than event, arrow, there's state. Here's where I am right now. I've got this broken down car. It's raining cats and dogs. There's this ugly house over there, and there's this empty winding road over here. What am I going to do? And there are options. I can do A, B, C. Okay? And when I get to I decide I'm going to do C. Sit in the car for a while. And so now here I am at this new state. And now I got more options. And branch, 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 branch. I'll take this option. And branch, 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 branch. And the idea is we have this tree. It spreads out, and it has millions, billions, trillions of end states. So there are many, many, many different paths through this story net. Each path, now let's think about this for a second. Let's say you play this game once. You start up here, you do this, well, I'll take option B, and now option A, and now C, and now option G, and you navigate through, and you reach the end, and you're dead. Okay? That's a story. In other words, a single playing of a game is a sequence of events linked by cause and effect. A single playing of a game is a story. In other words, a game is a superset of a story. It is a more indirect representation of a story. It's a collection of stories causally linked together. There's some grand theme. And you've got about 1 million stories bundled into one box. And the player starts at the beginning of the story and makes his own story out of it by playing the game once. Only he gets to make a lot of stories out of it because he can play the game many, many different times. Sad thing is, in a lot of games, most of the stories have unhappy endings. So the player keeps trying until he gets the story with a happy ending. The basic idea here then is that you've got this story net. The story net is a fundamental concept in game design because it's a very good way to evaluate how good a game is. The richer, the bushier that story net, the more options, the more end states, the more stories the player can generate, the richer the game is. That's one quick and dirty rule of game design. How many options do you have? How many end states are there? Now, this can be used to wipe out an entire class of game design, and that is the adventure, the text adventure, or the graphics adventure for that matter. The entire Infocom product line, poof. Deja Vu, Shadowgate, Uninvited, poof. All of the Sierra Online graphic adventures, Wizard and Princess, all of that stuff, poof. All goes into one box. And this box has bad marks on it because what it says is scrawny story net. You know, a good story net is thick and bushy. It has lots and lots of variations and options. Boy, you can end up way up here, way down there, millions of endpoints. Not so with all of those games. With all of those, what has happened is the designer has hardwired all of the options. That is, he puts you in this room where there's the, what is it, the gefilte fish?
Babblefish.
The Babblefish.
The babblefish, yeah, that's right. The babblefish.
All that lined up.
What
Okay.
the radish?
Yeah. There's the babblefish here.
It's a buffet.
And, okay, he puts you in a situation and there is one correct solution. Oh, sure, there are 100 different options. You know, oh, well, let's stand in front of the vent with 5 chairs behind us and reach over and put the quarter in and grab it just as it comes out. No, that didn't work, damn it. Okay, let's put a box over the end of the vent. You go through all these, do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you bring the mail? I mean,
Yeah, email.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
left it on the doorstep.
Sorry. Yeah, you go through all of these ridiculous permutations. There are thousands of options, and one is correct. So, in other words, there's a story net, but there is one path. One single solitary path through this story net that works. All of the others, there may be lots of options at each point, but they are all, in effect, dead ends. And so what you have is not a rich, bushy tree. It's a very scrawny tree. Basically, the designer planned out in advance, this is the path you will follow. If you do not follow this path, you will lose. In fact, you probably won't get very far. You'll dead end halfway in. And so he's pre-planned the storyline. He has pre-planned all of your options, too. He said, here's how you can fail. He lists every point of failure. He puts it in the game. And then you have to discover the solution rather than create your own solution. This is, by the way, is a distinction between a game and a puzzle. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, most of them have, but given like the original adventure in Zork, which have a much bushier tree, I think,
They
because it's
do.
not linear, but still they all kind of come back to a single point.
Yes.
Or 1 or 2 points, which is the problem. I mean, I'm just curious as to your opinions on those as opposed to...
That is better. That is better. I mean, there are variations on this, degrees of scrawniness or bushiness. For example, one thing is to give people lots of real options and then cleverly bring them all back again. The best example I can think of this is something that was done in the 1968 World's Fair, I think it was. Czechoslovakian group had this thing that they called an interactive movie. And it's now laughed at as everything is wrong about these. And the idea was they created this basic story about 2 lovers or something, and they'd play the movie for about 5 minutes, and then they'd stop the movie. You know, one lover walks in, and there's the other lover in bed with somebody else. And they stop the movie! And then they get up in front of the audience and say, all right, what should be the reaction of the betrayed lover? Should he be angry and yell and shoot them, or should he be, or let's just say angry and yell and scream, or should he be hurt and run away? Yeah. No. They'd always give you two choices. And then the audience would vote for A or B. And it was always rigged to be a real close call. And they'd vote, one way. And so they'd take a branch and they'd play it out the way. And then the movie would come to a new decision point. Only the way they rigged it was both tracks would come to the same point. And you'd make the same basic decision the second time. And now only it was very cleverly rigged so that it seems entirely natural that they come to this point. You don't realize that both tracks have come to this point. You think, wow, this is special. And then they come to this point, another branch comes back together again, it comes back together again, it comes back together again. Basically, it was about a dozen of these boinkity boinkity boinks, and so they really only filmed 24 segments. So they gave the impression that, boy, hey, whatever you want, the movie is the way you want it to be. And it wasn't that way at all, it was a fake. Now that's about the worst possible case, because there were only 24 hardwired segments. But even a lot of text adventures have perhaps 100 or 200 hardwired segments or situations, whatever. They're still hardwired. They're still very finite. We're still talking about a fundamental limitation here that the number of branches you can build in, because they're pre-designed by the designer, are finite. You can only plan out a few hundred of these things.
Yeah. How do you account for the success of that sort of product? Or for that matter, even the Cinemaware success they're apparently having at this early stage?
Let's differentiate between various types of success. There's short-term success and there's long-term success. Atari is an excellent example. I mean, Atari proves that you can make a hell of a lot of money doing fast-paced arcade games for a while. I'm in this for the long haul. I'm not interested in grabbing a quick buck. I will point out that sales of Balance of Power have risen steadily for 2 years. That's the type of game we want to be creating. You know how nice it is to be collecting big royalties checks 2 years after you stopped working on a product?
No.
What if they're like, Chris?
It feels real good. And you don't get that by going after the fad, because the fad stuff has a curve that like that. And so you're right back in that trap again. All right, let's do another fad now, guys. And sure, you make a lot on the peak, but...
Plus, I think the market is going to become more sophisticated as better games come out.
Yeah.
I think what that short-term success is because of the unsophisticated marketplace.
Yes, that's very true. And that's Atari was trying to play that unsophisticated marketplace. Atari felt that its customers were stupid, and so it was just playing like fads. Atari died looking for one more Pac-Man. Didn't find it. The audience didn't want it.
But is there that real novel person out there that's got a C64 and dabbles and doesn't want to get deep? He just wants to, have 15 minutes of eye candy and a little bit of sound. And
yeah, there are people like that. I'm not saying that marketplace is gone. That marketplace will always be there. But I don't think that's a marketplace we can build our future on. Let's see. So the big idea when we compare games with stories is the difference between a storyline and a story net. And a story net concept is very useful. Two crucial questions you always ask about any game design is, how bushy is the story net? How many options, real honest options, does the player have? Let's not consider options to say, all right, now you can take the gun and shoot yourself in the face. Oh, wow, isn't this fun now? You want to ask, how many honest options does the player have? In the ideal game, there are an infinite number, or at least a huge number, of realistic options, of things that the player can do that are interesting and useful. In fact, by the way, here's another criterion that comes out of this. How many ways are there to win? This is a differentiation between a puzzle and a game. A puzzle has one way to win, a single correct solution. A game has many different solutions. You can win a game your way. That's vitally important. In an Infocom game, you've got to find his solution. In a good game, you create your personal solution. That means a lot to people. It's a lot more fun creating your own solution than merely uncovering somebody else's hidden solution. So look for the bushiness, look for the number of solutions, how many good solutions are there, how much richness. And let me point out, this is a point I'm going to be hammering at this afternoon hard. You don't get a rich tree by hardwiring options. You can only cook up, so if you're going to pre-plan each branch, and well, when he gets to this situation, we'll give him this, this, and this. Even if you spend years on this product, there are only so many 100 or 1,000 things you can put in. You're just going to run out of options. Consider how quickly the branch... Let's look at the tree in Pac-Man. Here is a really simple game, and yet consider the way the tree explodes on you. Because every time in Pac-Man you come to an intersection, you got options, right? 3 options, 4 options. You can go forward, left, right, or backwards. Just 4 basic options. And yet, that decision is weighted by the positions of the 4 guys chasing you. Well, gee, we got 3 of them dead ahead. I'm not going dead ahead. Okay, so you come around, and now you come back to the exact same position. If this were a hardwired game, you'd have exactly the same choices. But the neat thing is, Pac-Man, the situation changes. You come to the same intersection, you got the same set of choices, but the ghosts are in different positions. New set of options. And so in other words, if you imagine, here's Pac-Man, you start here at the beginning and you play, and you come to this intersection, and you got these 4 choices, left, down, or forward, backward, left, right, forward, or backward. This time you go this way and you navigate through, and then it has a looping structure. It loops back to the same position, only now it's a new place in the story net. You're in a new situation. You might go in a different direction. So in other words, you get monstrously huge number of branches, very thick, very bushy game, lots of options, lots of ways to win. You can win your way in Pac-Man, not some predefined way built into the code by some programmer. So I'll develop that point further later on. But StoryNet is an interesting and important idea. Difference between games and puzzles. How am I doing on time? Good Lord, I talk a lot. Games versus puzzles. I've already said it. The main difference is that a puzzle has a single solution, whereas a game offers multiple solutions. Let me also point out that there is no real interaction in a puzzle. Rubik's Cube doesn't, play games with you, literally, in the sense of, here you are, you put it down and it doesn't say, ha-ha, turned itself once. That was good. It doesn't do that. It just lays there like a dead thing. So you pick it up and there really isn't any interaction.
Interesting idea, though.
Yeah, now that would be interesting if
It's like the exploding cube.
yeah, or if it fought back and said, no, you can't take me that way. That's interaction. If it had some way that it could shoot back at you, that it could anticipate you and say, well, he thinks this will happen, but instead I'll do that. That's how you get interaction. You don't get interaction in a puzzle. Let me point out that the vast majority of things being sold as games are really puzzles. All adventures are puzzles. Basically, this is just a really complicated puzzle and you're going to solve it. Even a lot of things that I call games, I have to admit, have strong puzzle components. One of my own games, Eastern Front, in fact, all of my games are really puzzles, if you want to be really hard-nosed about it. Eastern Front is a puzzle. There is a, you have to learn. Look, you don't attack the guy facing that way. You move in, you attack him this way. There are things that you do that are right and things you do that are wrong. So, although I differentiate between a game and a puzzle, all games have an element of puzzleness in them. You are trying to find the right way to do it. Now, it's true that in Eastern Front, the Russians shoot back at you. They don't formally anticipate you, but they do behave under a set of rules that include an anticipatory element in them. In other words, there is some interaction going on there, but there is also some puzzleness mixed in there. So even games that I will call games have a strong element of puzzleness in them. So this is not anywhere near so black and white. There's always some puzzleness mixed in. That isn't bad. there's nothing necessarily wrong with puzzles. Puzzles are fun. A lot of people enjoy them. Great, wonderful, let's play puzzles. But when I talk about games, what I emphasize is the interactive component. That is what I feel is finest and best in a game, and you don't have that in a puzzle. Competitions. I have been approached 4 times now by publishers asking me, in 1983 I was approached with this question. Last year I was approached by 3 publishers. Chris, would you like to do a game about the presidential campaign? I mean, if we came out and released a game in, say, February 1988 on the presidential campaign, boy, there's going to be so much interest in that. Boy, that'll be a really great game. There's just so much marketing, especially after Balance of Powers. Everybody likes to typecast you. So after I did Balance of Power, they said, oh, Chris Crawford is a designer of political simulations. So let's get Chris Crawford to do an election campaign game. That's the way these people think. So every time I'm approached with this, I go back and say, okay, I'll think about it. Because in marketing terms, it is a very powerful idea, you must admit. I mean, there's an enormous amount of interest in this. And I'm sure you can see a lot of people would like to say, well, I'm the campaign manager for Gary Hart. What do I do?
Change your name to Dr. Ruth.
Yeah, you know. So yes, it's a fascinating topic. That doesn't mean that it's a good game. And I've always gone back to the drawing board and said, how am I going to make a game out of this? And I've always come back and said, no, I refuse to do this game because it is a bad game, because it isn't a game, it's a competition. Now, that doesn't prevent the fact there is a really crappy game out from SSI called President-Elect. Really bad stuff. But it's selling very well. Every election campaign, they introduced this thing in 81 or 82. It's written in BASIC. It's just real bad stuff. And yet, they're able to sell. They keep selling it. They've made plenty of money on the thing because people do want to buy a game like that. The only problem is they buy that. If they buy that game and it has my name on it, they won't buy my next game. So I'm not going to do that. And if you have any brains in your head, you won't do it either. Not until you can figure out what I can't figure out, and that's how to get around the fact that it's a competition. A competition is a non-interactive situation. Basically, imagine a foot race. Here we are at the start line, you and me, side by side, bang, the gun goes off, and we're running as fast as we can. What's happening between us? Very little. Yeah, sure, I'm looking at you and say, wow, he's getting ahead of me, I better try harder. But do you really think I would say, well, gee, I'm just running this race for fun, I'm not going to try hard anyway? No, I'm going to try my hardest no matter what. And yeah, it gives me maybe a 1% boost, you know, maybe if I get that psychological whatever, if I'm neck and neck with you, maybe I'll do a little better, we know that. But the interaction between people in a competition is weak. Now, if we could do things like, I could, trip you, now that's interaction. If I could jab you in the elbow, or you know, as we're running along, say, hey, I found out your wife's been sleeping with somebody else. You know, that's interaction too. Pardon?
That's political campaign.
But the thing is, in a political campaign, that interaction is tightly constrained. They can't really, I mean, if in a debate they could get up and say, Gary Hart, you're an adulterer. Bam! That's interaction. But no, we're presidential campaign candidates here. And so we don't say anything nasty like that. We simply say, yes, Gary, I realize you've been busy every night, but let's continue with this. You know, you have to be so indirect, so subtle. The interaction is tightly constrained, and so you're not getting the type of rich interaction that you want. In an ideal interaction, we wouldn't care about the voters. It'd be just, you know, the 8 of us duking it out in a small room, you know, smoke-filled room, and we'd work out who's going to be the next president between us. And, you know, whoever walks out of the room alive is president. But no, we're posturing for the voters. The real interaction is the interaction between me and the voters. That's where the essence of a political campaign is. Yes, there is some interaction between the candidates, but it is very constrained and it's kind of weak. It is primarily a competition, not a game. So yes, there can be interactive elements in a competition, but you have to be very careful about any competition situation because almost always there are constraints on the interaction. And so you're walking in with the deck stacked against you. You're walking into a weak game situation. Again, I emphasize, you can do products, entertainment products, products that sell, products that work, but it's a weak situation. You're asking for it. It's going to be hard doing a really high-quality product in a situation like that.
I'd like you to just go a little bit further with that, though, in terms of your newest product. In Trust and Betrayal, it would seem to me that that's between the 7 elements and the main character, a competition for power, which is, pretty much an analogy of what you would say people are doing in a political campaign. I realize they have an arena where they do get out one-on-one.
And that arena is everything. See, that's what differentiates Trust and Betrayal. There are no voters in Trust and Betrayal. In Trust and Betrayal, we are 7 of us in this small closed room, and 7 of us are going to duke it out by betraying each other and telling each other things and trusting and so forth. It is the interactions that take place between us that determine the outcome of the campaign. And so there you do have true interaction. But Trust and Betrayal is theoretically excellent. I'm going to be in big trouble if Trust and Betrayal is a big flop. Because theoretically it's so great. If it fails, it means the theory. It says bad things about the theories. Trust and Betrayal is the closest thing I've done to a true game because there is deep, rich interaction going on between you and the other characters. There's anticipation, a lot of anticipation going on. It is the least puzzle-like of anything I've ever done. Basically on all the theory. Basically you can take all the lecture outlines for these 2 days, put them all together, and almost the best expression of everything I'll be saying shows up in Trust and Betrayal. So Trust and Betrayal is a theoretician's dream. I will also point out there are at least 2 fundamental flaws in Trust and Betrayal, which will cripple its sales. It could still take off. I mean, the other strengths are so great, this thing has a real shot at being a hit. It will not be an overnight hit, though it will take a long time for this game to develop an audience. But anyway, the dangers of too much theory. Let's see. Toys. Difference between games and toys. Primary difference is the lack of closure and lack of formality. A toy doesn't have a goal. A toy you just sit down and play with. It's very open-ended. You just sort of, gee, what can I do with this toy? Nobody says, here's how you win with the toy. You just sit down and say, well, look at this. Oh, boy, meow, 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 whatever. You play with the toy in a very open-ended fashion. You make your own rules. You do what you want with it. It is a fantasy amplifier. It just lets you explore your fantasies in whatever direction you want to go in. A game is distinct in that I impose a goal upon you. Let me tell you a little story about the importance of goals for many people. This is the difference between children and adults. Children are more fantasy-oriented and do appreciate the open-ended situation of a toy more than adults do. Adults have difficulty in a pure toy situation. I'll give you 2 examples. Example 1. My wife bought me a toy for Christmas. For Christmas, I got one of those radio-controlled boats. See, we have a pond up at our place where we live. And she thought, gee, wouldn't it be fun if Chris could stand out on the edge of the pond in the mud. And this boat is going and so forth. Yeah, it has a water cannon on it. And we can shoot ducks.
See, ducks can fly. I got one of those for Christmas, too.
So, anyway,
Almost kept it.
I played with the toy just once, and then a friend of mine came over, and so he and I went out to the pond. He's a real techie guy. He likes to play with techie toys, and so I thought he might enjoy it. So the 2 of us went out, and we drove it around the pond for about 3 minutes, and then we said, let's put something out there and see if we can sink it. See, so we got this cup, plastic cup, and we floated it out into the middle, and the idea was, can you use the squirter to fill it with water and sink it? And we had problems, so we said, let's just run it down. We still couldn't sink the thing, but we had a lot of fun once we had a goal. But just driving the boat around a pond was real boring. So adults have difficulty. We're both, my friend and I, are both type A personalities, you know. Sink something, destroy something, build something, just do something. So we couldn't really adjust to a pure toy. Children do better with that. But adults do have a bit of a problem with an open-ended toy. I'll give you one other story about the difference between toys and games and how adults respond to it. Balance of Power, when it was first created, I was worried, you know, here's a game that was very political. Big problem with political biases. How do you win at Balance of Power? Well, the victory conditions are deeply political. And it would be an insult to my players to impose my political views on them in the form of the victory conditions. So I thought about this and I came up with a truly inspired concept. At the beginning of Balance of Power, in the original version, or an early version before playtesters started working on it, at the beginning of the game, it asked you to declare your goals. And there were 5 basic dimensions. You could look at how many people get killed in insurgencies and war around the world during your tenure as president. How much global economic progress is there? How many crises are there? How close do you come to a nuclear war? Even if you don't actually have a nuclear war, how many times did you skitter on the brink of nuclear war? Let's see. Oh, and then there was one, I was trying to get the political spectrum. There was one in there. Did you kick the Ruskies' butts? There was some way I had of measuring how much you clobbered the Ruskies. That was closely related to the other one, which was the final one in the game, which was prestige. So the idea was I gave you 5 different measures, and at the beginning of the game I said, put your money down, and you could even distribute it. You could say, well, I believe that preserving world peace is the most important thing. And so the number of times I skitter close to a crisis, that's the first most important thing. And the next thing is the people who get killed. You know, so depending on your political views, you could adjust the goals of the game to suit your own political tastes. And so I was really proud of that. Boy, how insightful that was. I thought I was being very clever. Okay, put it out to the playtesters. They all came back with the same complaint. Gee, Chris, that's really neat. I really like that. But how do you win? And I'd say, well, you just declare your goals. And you know, at the end of the game, it shows you how close you came to your goals. And you say, oh, yeah, I know, that's really great. But I want to know whether I won or not. And I'd say, well, whether you won or not depends on how you did on your goals. Well, yeah, but I want the game to tell me whether I really did win or not. Not this fake-o thing about whether I met my goals. I want to know whether I won. So I went through this argument round and round, trying to say, but it depends on what you said you wanted to do. Finally, it boiled down, they didn't want the game telling them how well they did by their measures. They wanted an absolute index of success. They wanted the game to say, you won, or you lost. They wanted it clear, black and white. They wanted an absolute notion of victory or success. So I ended up tearing out my insightful scheme that respects people's political biases and said, this is what is good in geopolitics, and that is bad. You win or you lose. And people were very much happier. So people don't like open-ended toys where they get to play with geopolitics. They want games where there's a clear goal and they're going to achieve it. They've got plenty of situations with fuzzy goals, ambiguous moral dilemmas, and so forth. They get that in the real world. In a game, they want to win or lose. So we have to respect that about people. Okay, let me turn to the psychology of game playing now. Exactly halfway in. My timing is great. Why do people play games? What is going on? Wait, let's take a break. We've gone for 2 hours. I'm in a nice break point. Break. That's around 10 minutes.
Take 10.